that is a remarkable advance in automation is what's called conflict alert. The computer keeps track of, as the radar keeps feeding moment by moment updates on where the plane is, both in altitude and laterally. As the computer keeps feeding this new information, getting this new information from the radar, the computer can keep calculating where planes are headed, where they're going to be in the next 2 minutes or so. If planes within 2 minutes of one another are on anything like a collision course, all kinds of alarms go on at the particular controller station that's handling that. And he can send out, get on the radio and tell one of the planes or both to take evasive maneuvers. This happened right out here in New York when a South American airliner got about 4,000, I forget the exact figures, but got about 4,000 feet below what his altitude should have been heading up Manhattan, and he was headed right for the World Trade Center. And just about the time the controller caught it, he should have caught it before, the conflict alert system went off, and they missed by a couple of miles, but it could have been hairy.
You mean to say the conflict alert system that you're praising so much could lead to such a hairy situation, as you describe it?
It doesn't lead to it, it averts it. It detects when planes are getting on a collision course, which previously you had to depend upon the controller watching the radar, or watching the shrimp boats, or later the three-dimensional radar, and keeping track of them. Now we have a backup, an electronic backup for the controller.
I guess all I'm saying is I want those signals to go off long before 2 miles away from...
I didn't say... I said 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Fair enough.
Plane goes many miles in 2 minutes. They're going at that 250 miles an hour when they're flying up Manhattan.
I wouldn't take it all back. Instead, I'll switch the question to something else. Are these new technologies in place now in the major airports of the country?
The conflict alert system is in place
everywhere,
throughout the system, except in little, small.
Why then do we hear so frequently that the pilots will say, this airport, that airport, another airport, these are the bad ones, stay away if you can?
Well, that's because there are other things to getting a plane into an airport than keeping separated from other planes.
Poor whiskey, things like that, bad hotels? Now, come on, you don't mean that. What are you talking about that?
Well, take the San Diego collision which happened in the fall of 1978. That was in relatively clear weather. Those planes were not being... Well, it was a complicated thing, which I haven't got time to go into here, but those planes were making visual approaches. Visual flight rules were in effect then, and theoretically, they had transitioned from a computerized control where they had to be kept apart by computer links relayed to them by the controller. They were said, you got that plane in sight, go in behind him. Well, they had the wrong plane in sight, and two planes came together. In other words, when you can get a lot of more planes into an airport at a particular time if you transition from being controlled by traffic controllers at 3-mile intervals. Well, you can cut those intervals by a considerable amount if you say, okay, follow that Airline 747 in, he's on his base leg, and you look at it, and somebody lost track of one of the airplanes in the transition.
Now, can that happen with the new technology?
Oh, yes. Well, now we've got another thing coming along, but it isn't here and in place yet. This is what's called collision avoidance systems. That's CAS. And these have, well, the airlines, the industry has been working on these things for 2 decades. As a matter of fact, way back in the late 60s, around 70, one airline went so far as to order such a thing. Now, what a collision avoidance system is an electronic black box in an aircraft which will keep track. It has its own sweeping radar, and it can tell when it's getting within range of another plane that's properly equipped. And if it does so, the computer, and we now have micro-miniaturization so we can make these computers very small, will signal that another plane is in sight and tell the pilot climb, dive, and eventually take a right turn, take a left turn. Now, these things have been flown experimentally. Prototypes of them have been in flight experimentally on Piedmont Airlines, and there are smaller ones for smaller aircraft that don't tell you which kind of an evasive maneuver to take, but at least will alert you that another plane is within your range. So if the pilot's got his head in his lap reading a map, he'll look up and look around much more vigorously. And they should be on the market within 2 years.
Dick, we only have a few minutes left. The same doggone thing happened last time, and it's my fault. So I wanted to talk, at least now for a couple of moments, about the private planes, the private pilots. They seem to be, mention of them the last time we talked seemed to me to be a little bit like waving a red flag in front of a bull. You still feel that way?
Whom are you waving this red flag in front of?
You. You seem to feel that we had a real problem in terms of safety with the activities of the private pilots.
Well, the private pilots, private aviation has a much inferior record of safety to what the airlines have, for instance. But they have made great strides, I think, since I was here last, and they're getting a larger percentage of them are real professionals. They're cooperating, I think, much better with the government agencies, and the agencies are cooperating much better with them. I think there's a better rapport, and I think there's a higher level of expertise in general aviation, and there's a lot of safety efforts being promoted by the Safety Board, by the Flight Safety Foundation, by the private pilots' organizations themselves. So I think there's been a big improvement in that area.
Did the controller strike lead to regulations upon private flying that diminish the threat they might have been to regular commercial flying?
No, because after all, the country's open equally to everybody, and the private aviation was given its quota. In other words, the cutbacks that were made, the quotas, the limitations on flights were, they tried to make them equitable so that they impacted equally on airlines, private pilots, air taxis, and everybody else. So I don't think that the private aviation has suffered any particularly inequitable cutback in its activities.
Do they think so?
They have been relatively quiet. Now, I haven't, they maybe figure that this is the politically good thing to do in an era when the public in general, I think, is pretty much behind what President Reagan has done. He got a tremendous amount of support in how he handled the controller strike. So at the moment, they seem to be not making a lot of noise.
Dick Whitkin, thanks for joining me today on The Open Mind.
Good to see you again.
And thanks, too, to you in the audience. I hope that you, too, will join us here again on The Open Mind. And meanwhile, as an old friend used to say, good night and good luck.